Good evening, everyone. It is certainly a pleasure to see each of you. My name is Kimberly Dumpson. I am Vice President for Advancement with the UMass Amherst Foundation. At the outset, let me take a moment to thank the Cape Cod Alumni Network for hosting our event this evening. The Cape Cod Alumni Network is one of our first alumni networks and for decades has been active in this community and most notably supporting scholarships. And so you can learn more about the scholarships by scanning the QR codes around the room. But I just want to say thank you to the Cape Cod Alumni Network for working with us and really supporting the university over the years. I am from Maryland, and so it's always a pleasure to visit the Cape, particularly when we can talk about issues as important as coastal resiliency. And for me, this issue is deeply personal. In the early or mid-1960s, my mother was one of the first employees of the EPA, the Environmental Protection Agency. And I grew up with an understanding of the importance of the environment, particularly our waterways. As a kid, I had the pleasure of growing up looking at the Wicomico River every day. It's a tributary that feeds into the Chesapeake Bay, which is, of course, the nation's largest estuary. That waterfront, our panelists might say, is a working waterfront. There's a ferry that shuttles workers and tourists from one county to another. There are barges that traverse the river, carrying grains and other supplies for farmers in our community. And it's used by commercial fishermen or weekend fishermen like my father used to be, and oystermen and crabbers who contribute to Maryland's economy. On the backside of our house is marshland that in years past served as a forbidden playground as I befriended all manner of little inhabitants from minnows to turtles to frogs. But times have changed. Sea levels are rising. My mother has had to evacuate her home on more than one occasion. The coastline is eroding, and the health of our river is not as it once was. And so tonight's topic is certainly a timely one. Hurricanes Eleni and Milton have left a trail of devastation across many states in our region. And right now, my significant other is in Tampa visiting his 85-year-old aunt whose home was ravaged by Hurricane Helene and is now displaced, thankful for her life, but she's lost nearly everything else. And so our hearts this evening are with those who have been impacted by these events. And it's in times like these that we truly understand the need to better understand the risks and impacts of climate change. In times like these, we appreciate the importance of regional collaborations to address such issues, as well as the promising opportunities for the blue economy, adaptive planning, and coastal resilience. Climate change impacts on the Northeast will be most acute on the coast. New England is experiencing faster rates of atmospheric warming, coastal waters warming, and sea level rise than most continental United States, creating compounding challenges. In Massachusetts, communities and working waterfronts are increasingly impacted by extreme storm and precipitation events, high levels of flooding, storm surge inundation, and erosion. These rapidly increasing pressures on natural systems are intimately connected to people and society, requiring a holistic, system-based approach to research, planning, and development, as well as training and engagement with sustainable practices to enhance participatory co-production, adaptation, and resilience. The Northeast Center for Coastal Resilience, or NCCR, serves as a regional knowledge hub focused on providing actionable coastal science, informing policy and local decision-making, supporting sustainable blue economic development, and facilitating strategic regional collaborations in working waterfronts. NCCR is a multi-institutional collaboration of UMass Amherst, UMass Boston, UMass Dartmouth, UMass Lowell, and Woods Hole. Tonight, we are going to learn more about this important work underway. And now it is certainly my pleasure to introduce my dear colleague, Rob DeConto. Rob is Provost Professor of Geosciences and co-director of the School of Earth and Sustainability at UMass Amherst. Rob has previously held research positions at the U.S. National Center for Atmospheric Research and the National Oceanic and Atmospheric Administration, or NOAA. Rob studies polar climate change, the response of ice sheets to warming climates, and coastal impacts of sea level rise. Rob also serves on international science advisory boards and is a lead author for the Intergovernmental Panel on Climate Change. Please join me in welcoming Rob DeConto, who will introduce our panelists.
Thank you, Kim. I'm so happy to be here. The first thing I'll say is, a classic Massachusetts story. My parents were first-generation immigrants to the U.S. from southern Italy and ended up retiring to the Cape. So I know this part of the world very well. I understand the pressures that the Cape is under because of environmental change. And, I have that perspective of having dug clams and surfed on the beaches of Wellfleet before the great whites came back, I'll say. So this is really, to me, a personal opportunity to connect with all of you. So, as Kim said, the theme is coastal resilience, and you're going to hear a couple of different perspectives among people who have dramatically different expertise and study very, very different things. But the whole point is that, grappling with environmental change and the fact that the environmental change is accelerating takes a really interdisciplinary approach. It takes physical scientists working with engineers, working with social scientists. Sometimes, we're working more and more with indigenous peoples who bring a really unique perspective on understanding how to work and adapt to a changing environment. So we are going to, I'm going to try to provide some framing for all of this. You're going to hear a little bit from each of us to hear about our specific work in the space of coastal resilience. And then, I hope that we can have some discussion. I think some of what each of us will say will pique the interest of you in different ways, and we're here to have a conversation. And when it's all said and done, we want to make sure that you know who we are. We'll try to provide you with a few resources so that you can reach out and follow up, and we'll try to keep the conversation going. So, we're in this for the long haul. Okay, so I'm going to begin speaking, and as Kim said, I'm a Provost Professor of Climate Science at the University of Massachusetts, and the director of the School of Earth and Sustainability. We're going to hear from Eleni Christofa, who is an engineer who studies transportation systems and the sustainability and resilience of transportation systems. And then we're going to hear from Marta Vicarelli, who is an environmental economist. She has a background in atmospheric science, but she ended up doing her PhD work in understanding the economic impacts of environmental change, but also thinking about different approaches to resiliency that can actually have really important co-benefits to the environment and to the local or regional societies. Okay, so we've heard now a couple times about this School of Earth and Sustainability, and this might be new to some of you if you haven't been on campus in a few years. This is a new unit of UMass Amherst that was approved by the Board of Trustees in 2016, and of course things got a little slowed down somewhat through the COVID era, but I'm currently serving as director. Darcy Connor Maresca, who's sitting up front in the left-hand corner of the room, is the associate director of the school. That it's really because of her incredibly hard work that you're going to see. I think we've been able to do quite a bit so far with limited resources. And while I'm still remembering to say this, I think some of you in this room have actually contributed and have supported the School of Earth and Sustainability. And so Darcy and I just wanted to offer a really heartfelt thank you and gratitude for supporting the school. So my bread and butter, the research that I did in graduate school and that then propelled my career, was studying the ice sheets on Greenland and on Antarctica and how they're responding to a warming climate. And that, has really important downstream impacts on places like Cape Cod, because the water that is melting and coming off of those ice sheets, is going into the oceans. And those ice sheets are so big, they have the potential to drive enormous sea level rise. And you'll see some maps of what the Cape might look like in the future, given potential response of those ice sheets to a warming world. These are really dramatic, wildly dynamic places. And I feel really fortunate to have, been able to have a career doing field work in places like Antarctica, and then coming back with information that we find in the field, and then developing computer models. These are the computer models that actually make the predictions about what might happen to the ice sheets in the future, so that we can then inform coastal communities about what we might expect down the road. And you're going to see some of the results of that kind of work. And I think, as Kim also mentioned, in maybe the last decade or so, because of the findings that we were coming up with in the field, working, studying these ice sheets, the implications are so important for policymakers, for stakeholders, particularly in coastal places around the world, to understand the science, that I've become very engaged in science communication and in science policy at not just the national level, but the international level through the United Nations. And so I have been a lead author of the Intergovernmental Panel for Climate Change, which you might have heard the acronym, the IPCC. This is the guidance that every policymaker, every president in the US, every congressperson gets these reports laid on their desk about every 5 to 7 years, in providing the information that we need about what we might be facing. And then, I then work with people like Eleni and Marta in thinking about what are the implications for societies, for economies, for the environment, for ecosystems, for engineering. Can we build this bridge here, or do we need to move it someplace else? And so this is the way that the work is happening now, is that none of us are doing this on our own. It's very, very integrated. So the School of Earth and Sustainability is all about providing opportunities for people like us who come, to these challenges from really different perspectives together. And so we try to facilitate interdisciplinary work. And you can see here are kind of like, this is the ethos of what we're trying to do. We're building a hub at the UMass Amherst campus for sparking innovation and inter and transdisciplinary collaboration around sustainability. We are connecting the research with education. We are providing opportunities for students, our UMass students, to get their hands dirty, working directly with scientists and engineers and people out working in the field, so that we're able to translate what we are all beginning to understand from an academic perspective, so that it can translate and have impact on people and communities. Right now, the school brings 5 different departments together that span 2 different colleges within the university system. And as Darcy will tell you, this is not an easy task. Sometimes, our universities are built on very disciplinary, pillars of specific disciplines, and they still have not fully evolved to the point where it's easy to start doing this cross-discipline work together. And so Darcy and I are working literally almost around the clock in trying to help the university system change to make the kind of research outcomes that you're going to see in a few minutes possible. Okay, so, problems like environmental change, again, right, it takes this very interdisciplinary approach. This is not an engineering problem. It's partly a human problem, so social science is important. It's partly a climate and environmental science problem, but it's a lot of these different things that we need to be thinking about collectively. So we have become, this School of Earth and Sustainability, really focused on thinking about the really wicked problems that are so complex that they require this kind of transdisciplinary approach with people coming at, looking at a problem from a really different perspective. So, is it a complex issue? Well, that's something that SCS, our school, wants to try to tackle. We're trying to leverage, to the best of our ability, the existing richness of the world-class scholarship that we have on our campus already. And it turns out, our campus, we are so blessed. We have, leading engineering schools, agriculture, the #1 food science school in the United States. Eleni is part of one of the country's leading transportation centers. There are all these different facets that bring something really important to studying environmental change and trying to come up with solutions to these big problems. And so, what we're trying to do is take that existing capacity and find new ways to get people to start working together. Again, really, the student piece is really important to us. We're trying to provide opportunities for students that leave UMass with real-world experience so that they're ready to go. They have a strong CV, a strong resume, and that they, our hope is that they are going to be really well prepared. We're a special campus in that, Darcy, tell me if I get the numbers wrong, but roughly like 90% or so of our graduates stay in the Commonwealth. And, that's not the case for a lot of the other major public research institutions. Darcy's nodding, so I'm good. And so that means that, we need to get it right at UMass Amherst because that is so impactful on the future of the Commonwealth. Some really cool successes. Maybe you hadn't heard this. This just dropped 6 days ago, a press release. So the Princeton Reviews just came out, and they do a rundown on how well colleges and universities are doing in the sustainability space. We just got those numbers back. UMass Amherst is now a top 25 institution, which is amazing, and we're in the top 5 among the big publics with more than 20,000 students, right? Amazing achievement. And, I have to say that the person sitting there in the left-hand corner of the room has a lot to do with that. And we're doing this really, in part on my spare time. I'm sure I have a fancy faculty title now, but I'm still faculty. I teach students. I sometimes still teach the occasional undergraduate course. I train graduate students. I think I've mentored more than 65 graduate students in my career, and I'm still doing that work. And, between the cracks, we're trying to find the time to help elevate the campus. A couple of really, some more things that I just want you to all know to feel really proud about your school. The School of Earth and Sustainability, has played a supportive role in this. This is a new center supported by the National Science Foundation. This is the biggest grant that UMass has ever gotten from the National Science Foundation, $30 million, to bring indigenous scholars together with physical, climate scientists like me, to try to think about new ways and new perspectives on understanding what we can do to respond to a changing environment. This is the Center for Braiding Indigenous Knowledges in Science. Really, this is the National Science Foundation has never supported anything this just really forward-thinking, and just, what we've been doing for the last 50 years, we've known about climate change for a long time, and what we've been doing has not been working, right? So these are the kinds of efforts that we're making at UMass Amherst to try something new to bring to the story. There's an emerging Energy Transition Institute. So the School of Earth and Sustainability helped spark and was the seed funder for what is now a growing Energy Transition Institute. These are social scientists and energy engineers, people who work on wind energy and wind turbine design, working with economists and social scientists in trying to think about a transition to renewable energies that is just and equitable and beneficial to as many people as possible. We have new graduate training research programs that are again supported by the National Science Foundation that came largely from the support of the School of Earth and Sustainability, largely just getting people together for the first time and talking and coming up with some, sometimes it's just an event like this, literally, with a bunch of faculty from different backgrounds, sometimes over a beer or a glass of wine, and maybe they haven't met before and didn't even know the other person was there on the same campus, and it turns into a multi-million-dollar funded program. Those are the kinds of things that we've been doing. And the coastal effort that Kim talked about is one of these. And that's now what we're gonna focus on for the rest of the evening tonight. Kim is exactly right. Massachusetts and the Northeast is warming at almost twice the pace of the rest of the country. We are already just under 4 degrees Fahrenheit warmer. It's amazing, 4 degrees Fahrenheit warmer on an annual average than we were in the year 1900. That's just mind-blowing to me. That's really remarkable. And because the ocean is absorbing a lot of that heat energy, warm water takes up more space. And, during the last century, sea level was it was rising, and that sea level rise, as you can see in this graph on the top, you don't need to see the details. You don't have to be a statistician to see that there's a trend from the lower left to the top right. That is the sea level record from one of the country's oldest recording devices, a tide gauge in Boston Harbor. And the blue line is the annual average, and there's noise. Some years sea level gets a little bit of a jump and then it goes back down a little bit. But the black line is the trend. And this, you can see that there's a kick here on the end. This is where we are for this year in 2024, almost off the chart. There's an acceleration in the pace of change. It's not just temperature, it's sea level rise. And this is coming again from the oceans warming, and because Greenland and Antarctica are dumping more and more water into the global oceans. It is raining more. It's not your imagination. There's a lot more precipitation now in the Northeast. And what's happening is that runoff, that when it makes it to the coast, that actually, it's doing lots of different things, but there's a bigger threat of flooding, flash floods, rivers that can get choked with water. But that water also contains a lot of nutrients. Sometimes it has a lot of bad stuff in it. The nutrients that are getting delivered to the ocean more and more because it's raining more are beginning to aggravate the fact that the ocean waters around the Cape are becoming more acidic. So the carbon dioxide that's coming out of all of our tailpipes is that carbon dioxide, it mixes with water and it makes an acid. And that acidity, the ocean is feeling that change in acidity. And stuff that we like to eat and grow, like oysters, are really sensitive to that increase in acidity. So there's a local, regional economic impact of the fact that it's raining more because it's actually making the ocean acidification problem even more problematical. That's what Scituate looks like now when there's a big bad nor'easter. And the reason why this is becoming more and more frequent is that not only are the storms becoming more frequent and generally more powerful, but the background sea levels are inching up and up and up every year. This doesn't sound like a big number, but here in the Northeast, sea level is rising at almost 6 millimeters per year in New England. The global average is below 4, it's like 3.8. So it's almost 6 here in New England, and that's what you're seeing here. And so every year goes by, you have the same nor'easter, and the impacts are beginning to look like this more and more often. What used to be 1 in a 100-year event is becoming, 1 in a 10-year event. And as we go out into future decades, what used to be a 1 in a century event becomes annual. And someday it's going to become subannual. Yeah.
Just very quickly, what is the purple or magenta along the northeastern coast road?
Yeah, so this is.
It's raining more, but what are the numbers?
Yeah, so the numbers are percent relative to the normal precipitation. And this was this spring. And these purple numbers are like 175% of the normal average year. And again, just emphasizing that the Northeast in this part of the world right here is really feeling that. Great question. Okay, so the Intergovernmental for Climate Change, the IPCC, this is a United Nations organization. It's within the United Nations sort of ecosystem, is doing what it can to provide guidance in different places around the world in terms of what's going to happen in the future. And I've spent years now helping develop the sea level guidance for the United Nations and the IPCC, literally that get translated down into like our US National Climate Assessment. And these are the same numbers that if you had a local policymaker who was trying to make some decisions about, I don't know, whether or not to build a seawall in Sandwich, they would look to this information. And what is kind of special about this is that what we're doing now is we're starting with a global perspective on environmental change, and now we're taking that global perspective and we're homing right in on literally a local place. So this is a product, and if you're interested in where to find this or where to look something up yourself, I'm happy afterwards to show you where you can make a chart like this yourself. This is for Woods Hole. These are future sea level projections for Woods Hole. And if you look on the left-hand side of this chart, this is in meters. Okay, so this is in meters, so 1 meter, roughly about 3 feet. It begins on the left-hand side in the year 2020, and this is providing a picture out to the year 2150. And you see these solid lines. Those solid lines are the best estimate by the IPCC for some imagined future emissions scenario. And by emissions, I mean how much fossil fuel use we're going to continue to maintain. What kind of future economy are we going to have? Is it going to continue to be largely fossil fuel driven? Are we going to get our act together and transition to renewables soon? Net zero carbon in 2050? And these scenarios are basically looking at these different emission scenarios, not too much fossil fuel use, medium fossil fuel use, a lot of fossil fuel use going forward, and then using our best understanding of the physics of the system, the climate system, the ice sheets, to plot a course for sea level rise so that we can start thinking about, how we're going to deal with this. So just a couple things I want to point out. The bottom solid line, this blue line, is a world where we achieve net zero in roughly 2050. Okay, so that means basically beginning to cut emissions of carbon dioxide by roughly 10% a year starting yesterday. Okay, super ambitious, right? It turns out we have the money and the technology to do it. The question is, do we have the collective political will? This red line right here is basically business as usual, where the pace of economic growth continues, and it continues to be driven basically by the same kind of fossil fuel driven economic model. So it's obvious that the emissions drives a huge difference in our future, whether it's more likely to have roughly a half a meter of sea level rise in 100 years, or something more in line with 2 or 3 meters, so way taller than me. Okay, really, really dramatic differences. And then you see this. This red area is the range of uncertainty within the estimates. And in fact, the top of this red range is something that a statistician or Eleni will, engineers think like this. It's the 83rd percentile of all possible sea level outcomes. Okay, that means that there is still a 17% chance that something even worse than the top of the red could happen in the future. And those numbers, that's 5.5 meters of sea level in the year 2150 as not being out. We can't rule that out as a possibility in the future. But the good news, okay, is that, in the lower emissions cases, the column over to the left where you see a label SSP 1-1.9, that's the net zero future world, where even in the year 2150, we're looking at less than a meter of sea level rise. versus, something in the year 2100 where we're talking at several meters of sea level rise. Very, very, very stark differences. But what's really important for you to notice is that in the year 2050, just a few decades from now, it doesn't matter what emissions scenario is going to happen in the future. The low, the medium, and the high emissions scenarios are all predicting, roughly 40 centimeters of sea level rise, a little more than a foot, okay, here on the Cape. This is specific to the Cape. So we need to plan on at least a foot of sea level rise in the next couple of decades. At the same time, people like Eleni need to think about the engineering challenge of, okay, maybe we're going to be around, a foot of sea level rise, but it's possible that we need to be thinking about infrastructure that can handle meters of sea level rise at the same time. This is what the Cape looks like with 2.7 meters of sea level rise. That is, I used 2.7, I should have used 2.4. 2.4 is our best estimate for a high emissions future as being possible in the year 2100, and that's what the map looks like. Yeah. Somebody have a question? I think it was just a phone. Yeah, no, and so afterwards I'll tell you where you can plug in any number you want, and you can look at the projections and think about, what does my house look like? How about that piece of property I've always driven past and really want to buy? And, and that's important to me that you have that guidance. So this was the vision, was to actually think about developing a resource for the Commonwealth, not just, these little off chances that you have, some interaction with people like me and Marta and Eleni, but to actually have a resource that is there for the Commonwealth and for the region, the Northeast in general, where we are supporting people doing the science, so supporting advancing actionable science. We want to be able to inform people who are making policy decisions, and at the same time supporting economic development. We want to be doing that in a fair and just way, for sure, but we want to make sure that our citizenry in the Commonwealth have good, clean jobs, and that our economy is thriving as well at the same time our environment is thriving and clean. I don't know if all of you know this, our campus, UMass Amherst, has an amazing resource. That picture, hopefully, this is being a little finicky. I think it'll come back. This is the Gloucester Marine Station. We own this. This is your school. It is in Hodgkins Cove. It's right, if any of you are familiar with the North Shore in Gloucester, this is basically Annisquam. It's amazing. This is the building. And the Commonwealth has just made, they've announced they're investing $1 million of capital investment to shore up the infrastructure out here. And the campus has pledged and has matched another $1 million. So there are $2 million going into this resource. And the people that are currently out at the Gloucester station working there have been mainly supporting regional fisheries economies. They're challenged with issues of declining fisheries. Gloucester is certainly struggling, and I know New Bedford is too. At the same time that there's this growing offshore renewable energy infrastructure, development is happening, and these wind farms are going in, as you all very well know, here on the Cape, and that's posing some serious challenges. And the folks out of Gloucester are working on some of these issues. But what we realized was that, yeah, this is a great resource and we could do some really great work on the North Shore, but that's just one place in the Commonwealth. So our vision was to leverage the expertise we have at UMass Amherst, people like myself, and we have a lot of amazing faculty who are working in coastal resiliency, whether it's hydrology, it's sediment transport, it's people like Eleni and Marta, of course, but we have resources like the Gloucester station. But the other UMass campuses have their own amazing resources. There's, you know, the Marine School at UMass Dartmouth, in South Dartmouth. UMass Boston has 2 amazing research facilities. Well, they have now the Stone Living Laboratory that is studying nature-based solutions to climate change that Marta is going to talk about. There's a field station out on Nantucket. So we partnered, not with just the other campuses, but roughly 50 private and public partners throughout the Commonwealth. So these are everything from the Cape Cod Chamber of Commerce partner. These are the Massachusetts tribal communities and tribal nations partners. And so we've kind of pulled these 50 partnerships together with about 60 faculty across the UMass system to develop this concept of a Northeast Center for Coastal Resilience to work on these intractable issues. These are examples of the types of expertise that this effort has brought together. You know, and this is the thinking of this School of Earth and Sustainability concept, where it takes this hugely broad range of expertise coming together, working with communities and stakeholders on the ground who really understand the needs of their specific community, working with the academics in a collective way to come to some potential resolution to dealing with some of these problems. These are some examples of the impact our team has had. Climate Ready Boston was, you know, all of the sea level work was by our faculty, mostly from UMass Amherst, in fact, who are part of this effort to establish this coastal center concept. I'm working directly on Governor Healy's new Climate Science Advisory Panel. We're meeting roughly monthly, the so-called Resilience Coasts. We've had impact, you know, again, at not just the state level, but we've had impact on the projections that are in the U.S. National Climate Assessment, as well as, again, what I'm really proud of at the international level with the United Nations. So I see this as a wonderful opportunity. We have the full UMass system on board. This is bigger than just our campus and bigger than the Gloucester Marine Station. This is the entire UMass system coming together. I don't think there's ever been an effort that has brought the campuses together in such a way as this coastal concept. We already have a wonderful supporting set of faculty throughout the system. And again, we have a lot of people like yourselves in communities, sometimes business owners, people with indigenous perspectives on climate resilience and coastal resilience, all working together. And so we're really ready to ramp this up to the next level. And we have all been working, the 3 of us here that are before you today, in looking for opportunities for funding and support for the center. So I want to just show you a couple of slides because I want you to all know this. The UMass State Geologist's Office is headquartered at UMass Amherst, and we have a brand new state geologist who has taken the reins of the State Geologist's Office, Brian Yellen. He is a resource for you. He is a remarkable scientist. He got his PhD at UMass Amherst. We're very proud of Brian. He's doing amazing work. He studies a couple of things that you're going to relate to. Sediment changes on the coast because they're so important to maintaining beaches, protecting what's behind the beaches, to our shellfish flats, to the health of our marshes. We also have the Northeast Climate Adaptation Science Center, headquartered now at UMass Amherst. This is a federally funded, this is a partnership between the federal government and UMass Amherst. We have a number of federal scientists working with academics at UMass Amherst, focusing on climate impacts and adaptation in the Northeast region broadly, and shown by all the states that you see there in green. And so I just want you to know that I'm here to tell you all about the great things we're doing with our school and the Coastal Center, but there are a lot of really great things happening. This is just a couple slides from Brian that he asked me to show you. We're not exactly sure why, but there is a decrease in the amount of sediment that is being supplied to our beaches. And you're all hearing about the horror stories of like the retreating bluffs on the Outer Cape, for example. You know, you need sediment to maintain a beach. And unfortunately, the beautiful beaches that we still have here on the Cape are being maintained at the expense of those bluffs behind those beaches. We think that part of the problem is that we are armoring our beaches. We are trying to protect our shorelines, like, you know, Scituate in 1913 versus Scituate today. It's pretty tough to be able to keep continuing to supply sediment to the beach out in front when it's covered with those boulders. The houses are safe, maybe for a little while, right? But the sediment is being starved. Really interesting. The Cape is really important for actually sucking carbon out of the atmosphere and putting it into mud. And it turns out that just in Cape Cod salt marshes, the accumulation of those muds are the equivalent of taking 2,300 cars off the road every year. So these systems are really, really important. And if they begin to not work the way that they have been, there are some interesting repercussions. This is another contact I wanted you to see. This is Dave Boutt. Unfortunately, he was going to be here tonight, and he has the COVID house guest at home right now, unfortunately, so he couldn't be here. He's a remarkable, world-renowned hydrogeologist, and he's been doing basically two main thrusts of his research: studying the impacts of climate change on groundwater supplies in Massachusetts. At the same time, he goes all over the world studying the environmental impacts of lithium extraction. I drive an EV. It has a huge lithium battery. There's no totally free lunch, right? That lithium came from someplace. It came from a mine, and those practices are having environmental impacts. And so he studies these things. And he asked me to just show a couple of slides. You know, groundwater has important impacts. And because we are seeing more precipitation now in the Northeast, some places the water table is actually rising. We're not running out of groundwater. We, in many places, have the opposite problem, where the groundwater is intersecting with the land surface. And that is having all kinds of impacts in different ways. And so what Dave has been studying is, you know, yes, the impacts of that groundwater rise, but what's going to happen in the future. So this is just a diagram with the darker blues showing where the groundwater table is in the Commonwealth. In the darker blues, it's closer to the surface. So you can see where, you know, we're pretty close to intersecting a lot of the ground surface on the Cape. And two things are happening now to the Cape. Because it's a peninsula, it's surrounded by water, sea level comes up. With sea level rise, you can actually start to get some salt going into these fresh water supplies, and at the same time, sea level goes up, but that salt water impinging on the groundwater pushes the water table up. And it's kind of a double whammy. And so Dave has been doing some work with his group, and we have one of Dave's graduate students here working with Dave on some of this work, showing projected changes with these different future scenarios of sea level rise, where under the extreme future warm world scenarios, you can see areas being impacted by a pretty significant uplift in the groundwater table that's going to be impactful on our basements, on our infrastructure, on our septic systems. So those are just, you know, hopefully an overview of, you know, the infrastructure of UMass with this new School of Earth and Sustainability, bringing people together. This coastal center concept is one of the things that has led from that School of Earth and Sustainability. And you saw a few examples of some of the outcomes of the kinds of research that we're doing on the campus to support the health and the future of the Commonwealth. And with that, I'm going to pass the mic over to Eleni Christofa. Eleni is, yes?
Just one quick question.
Absolutely.
cities that are most prone to sea level rise on the East Coast, whether it be residential, commercial areas, or whatever. Cities that are going to be more impacted by sea level rise. I've heard Miami may be one, but what would you say?
So Boston's right up there because our sea level is rising faster than a lot of the other parts of the U.S. For sure, Boston. Portland, Maine is beginning to see impacts for the first time, where they're just getting what we call nuisance flooding. So we've built everything. All of our infrastructure was built right to the high tide line, right? Because the sea level is never going to rise. And that is the main problem. New York City also, very much so, in dire straits in terms of some of these projections of sea level rise. Some of the smaller cities in the Northeast, like Norfolk, Virginia, already being very heavily impacted. Norfolk's obviously important because there's a huge naval base there. And so one of the things that some of these impacts are having on are literally on our national defense in some cases. Houston, not in a good place. Obviously, Louisiana, thinking about other parts of the U.S., San Francisco. We're talking hundreds of billions of dollars in potential infrastructure that would be needed to maintain essentially the cities as they basically look today. The Seaport District in Boston, I'm sure many of you have been there. It's like a meter above sea level. I'm not sure those were really great investments 15 years ago. And in fact, here's a little plug for my friend David Abel at the Boston Globe. Look for a film. I think it's due for national release soon. There have already been pre-screenings. It's called Inundation District. Really interesting documentary on the Seaport District and why it was built and why did we just do that? And that's a Boston Globe documentary. So Eleni's going to, Eleni Christofa, who has actually been very much in the front lines of helping to develop this coastal center concept, is an associate professor at UMass Amherst in the Department of Civil and Environmental Engineering. Her primary expertise and love is in transportation. And most of what Eleni's work is focused on is the sustainable management and design of transportation systems. So she's been an absolute perfect partner. She holds a PhD and MS degrees in civil and environmental engineering from the University of California, Berkeley, and a diploma in civil engineering from the National Technical University of Athens, Greece. Eleni?
Thank you. Hi, everyone. Thanks for taking the time to be with us this evening. I'm really excited to be back at the Cape. As you heard, I'm originally from Greece, and I grew up on an island. So living on the western part of the state, I always complain there's no ocean close by, so I always love to come here and spend some time next to the ocean. It just makes me feel closer, makes me have all the memories from my childhood and growing up next to the ocean. So this rope was right, it's pretty finicky. I didn't even touch it, I think.
It's a little finicky.
Okay, let me get to that.
I had luck.
I know. Do you want to try it again?
Plugging and plugging back in.
No? There we are. If I let it go.
Don't breathe.
Okay. I will be gentle with it. Yeah, so as you heard, I'm a professor in civil and environmental engineering, and my training is in civil engineering, but at some point during my undergraduate studies, I had to pick a specialization within civil engineering, and I decided that I wanted to do transportation because I felt that had the most direct impact to everyday life, right? We travel every day, even if you don't use a car, you walk to go to places, so that got me excited. As you heard, I'm working a lot on what I call sustainable multimodal transportation systems, multimodal for the different types of modes, biking, walking, transit, cars. And I'm trying to look at all the aspects, all the 3 pillars of sustainability as it pertains to the environmental impacts transportation has, the efficiency that we move people through our systems. I try to have a people approach in the research I do, and also what impacts it has on society, on equity, and aspects like that. So you see here a few examples of types of work I do. I work a lot on transportation safety, primarily for electric scooters and bicyclists. And I understand that's not, directly the resilience part that you might be expecting me to start talking about, but I have examples of that work too. But I wanted to say that a lot of this other work I do definitely has an impact on climate change. 30% of the greenhouse gas emissions in the US come from the transportation sector. So, us driving cars certainly all the time certainly contribute to that. So, my motivation comes from the fact that we need to make other modes safe and efficient and comfortable for people to use, so we can take some cars out of our roadway system. I've worked with the Massachusetts Department of Transportation a lot. I guess I should mention here that I'm affiliated with the University of Massachusetts Transportation Center. Rob mentioned it a little bit earlier. We have a great collaboration with the state, with the Department of Transportation, and a lot of my research funding comes from that. I've worked with MBTA and Mass DOT on several different projects. You'll hear about a few of them, but one had to do with how do we estimate emissions from the energy consumption, and how do we model that so then MBTA can make more informed decisions about, budgeting and so forth and planning for future years. So transportation resiliency, obviously, there's a lot that has to do with how do we maintain our transportation, how do we build it. I have to say I don't focus that much on the building aspect of the infrastructure, but more so on understanding where are the critical and vulnerable links on our networks, so then we can, potentially prioritize maintaining them or introducing other types of solutions to address some of the climate change impacts. And in terms of equity, this also relates to my resiliency work, because I've been looking at how inequitable access to different types of destinations is across the state. We started by looking at access to food, and this is part of my community engagement work I've also been doing. So we are going out and talking to representatives from communities to further understand what aspects of the transportation system need improvement in order to give equitable access to everybody, to jobs, to food, education, and so forth, from a transportation perspective, obviously. So this is fairly recent. I'm really excited to share it with you. So a few weeks ago, I did this experiment. It's actually a data collection effort rather than an experiment, because I'm actually collecting data from the real world. So I'm interested in analyzing the interactions between bicyclists and cars. We've been introducing all this great bicycle infrastructure in our mostly cities. Sometimes we see them out in more rural areas like Amherst too. So what we did is we were flying multiple drones at the same time to collect video data that we will later be collaborating with another company that will analyze them using AI. And they will give us back the trajectories, and that's how we can understand, you place a certain type of bike lane, what does that mean on how bikes interact with cars? So it actually attracted a lot of attention. Boston Globe came out, WBUR, and some other Boston channels. So yeah, my moment of pride from the past month. So that's an ongoing project. Other things I've supported the state with, through again the Massachusetts Department of Transportation. I had done a study related to transition to zero-emission buses for transit agencies. So we looked across the country. We looked at how different transit agencies have been introducing those types of buses in their fleet. What does that mean about their infrastructure needs, their charging stations, and so forth? So it was able to inform Mass DOT's and MBTA's decision on how to move forward. Another one that can be expanded easily to relate to resiliency. I worked with the state to improve and revise their project prioritization process. So that's a process MassDOT is using to decide their funding decisions. So essentially to decide how they're going to prioritize the projects that are submitted by municipalities. They have different types of criteria. Some of them pertain to air quality, some of them pertain to safety, mobility, and so forth. So we looked at this from a public health angle, and we proposed 8 different criteria under the categories of accessibility, air quality, safety, equity, and physical activity to make sure that projects that are contributing towards those goals we have for each of those categories are included in the project prioritization process. And I'm excited to report that actually 2 of them, the one related to air quality and one related to accessibility, access to jobs, was actually incorporated in the process, and now it's being used on making decisions for funding projects across the state. So the one related to air quality, we had estimates of PM2.5 concentrations and nitrogen oxide concentrations for the whole state. In any area that was exceeding the statewide average was getting scored higher, especially if it was proposing a project that would be reducing, would be a change in the transportation system that would be reducing greenhouse gas, not greenhouse gas emissions, excuse me, PM2.5 and NOx emissions. And lastly, this is work that was recently completed and it will become a report to Congress. The objective of this study, and I will talk a little bit more about it later too, was to look at how active transportation can be used, so biking and walking can be used for disaster relief, both on the planning side and also post-disaster. So it entailed a literature review that we looked at how bicycling has been used in other areas. Most recently, there was an earthquake it might have been a year ago now, but in Hatay, Turkey, and they did use bicycles there to transport emergency and relief commodities. So I think it goes without saying that climate change has direct impacts on our transportation infrastructure. Here you see some images. This is just, I was visiting Memphis in Tennessee 3 years ago now, I believe, and it had just rained and the whole sidewalk was flooded, right? So even minor, let's say, events like a rainstorm could have impacts on access of people walking to different destinations, right? These are images from Hurricane Sandy in New Jersey, I believe, or New York, one of the two. And I think it was the same Hurricane Sandy. That was actually the first hurricane I experienced. It was the year, it was 2012, if I remember correctly. It was the year I moved to Massachusetts from California. So it was a very new thing to me, and it's still, so it still affects me to the day. It still motivates a lot of the work I do. Even though in Amherst we did not have much impact, I think there was more worry than what actually ended up happening, but for that region. So back to the disaster relief mobilization study. This was funded by the Federal Highway Administration. And again, I said it's going to result in a report to Congress that will be public at some point, but not yet. So essentially, this was a collaboration with another colleague at UMass, Boutt, and also with a company called Cambridge Systematics. And what we did is first we identified the criticality of different links in our networks. This is an example of Tacoma in Washington. We identified the criticality based on how many key critical destinations like hospitals, like food banks, we can access by walking and biking, and we actually separated biking to electric bikes because they can develop higher speeds. So how many of those we can access from each of those links in order to understand, in case of a disaster, which ones are the links that are more critical to connect us to these resources that we will need post-disaster. So essentially we used that, the criticality scores, in addition to other aspects. For example, exposure to a 500-year flood zone, and other aspects related to the soil, and whether it was paved or unpaved roads, to be able to do a spatial analysis, essentially of, what does the 500-year flood zone looks like, and calculate from all these parameters a vulnerability score, so we know where we would like to put our resources in. And here you see how that compares with Justice 40 census tracts that takes into consideration also the presence of vulnerable populations that a lot of times are disproportionately affected by these types of events because of chronic underinvestment in those areas. Yeah.
What would the deployment of those resources look like? So you found the critical areas. What is the fix?
So it could be as simple as, there's a bike path that, you just put, as soon as the disaster happens, you just put all your resources to clear that first, because it can provide direct access to a lot of these hospitals, or again, where food is being collected, storage places and things like that. I mean, that's an idea, right? It could be also more long-term things, like which roads do you maintain first? It depends on the decision you're trying to make. Okay, yeah, thanks for the question. So this is actually a project I'm excited about, and it has been facilitated through the School of Earth and Sustainability, so thank you. This is a collaborative effort with Marta, who's sitting here, our colleague Camille, Barchers, Mike Nodler and Boutt, who are colleagues of mine in transportation engineering. Camille is a professor in landscape architecture and regional planning. So we got some seed funding from the School of Earth and Sustainability to try to understand what are the transportation infrastructure resilience issues in our state. So we started by expanding on a survey that Marta had developed a few years back, and I think she'll present about it next. And we expanded that to focus mostly on transportation infrastructure. What are the challenges that coastal and inland municipalities in our state face? So you see here, they are colored in different colors. We had 35 coastal municipalities and 80 inland municipalities that responded to our survey. I'll present some of the results of the survey. There will be a report that will be coming out soon. It will be publicly available. But I wanted to say that after that, we actually also convened a summit. It was a workshop one day that we invited representatives of the municipalities to talk to us further about, what those challenges they're facing are, and maybe what types of research questions we should be targeting so we can support their efforts in ensuring that our transportation systems in our state are resilient to climate change impacts. And a lot of great things came out of that. I'll mention an example that's relevant to this area. Yes?
I may have missed it, but what's the color code? You got the...
Yeah, so the light blue, or I don't know what to call this color, that's inland municipalities, and these are the coastal ones, the darker blue ones. And no response is the white, so we didn't get everybody to respond. Out of the 300, how many municipalities? 350?
351.
Yeah, we had about 115,
Yeah.
so a third of them, approximately, that responded. Yep.
Are these responses from individuals or from municipalities?
From individuals working for a specific municipality, yeah. So they're supposed to be representing the municipality.
Yeah, so just a clarification is it's municipal officials that are affiliated to the Massachusetts Municipal Association. And the Massachusetts Municipal Association disseminated our survey together with the Center for Transportation.
Yep.
That's how we reach people.
Yeah, so I was going to say one excellent thing that came out of this in terms of, getting in contact and working with municipalities is that actually we talked with, the town of Wellfleet was represented at that summit, and we talked to them, and we have been in discussions on developing a project where we can have one of our undergraduate, we have a program for undergraduate students that is funded by the National Science Foundation, focused on transportation equity. So we've been developing a project with them, and we're hoping to have a student this coming summer to be working on some of the transportation resiliency issues that the town of Wellfleet is battling with. Okay, so some of the questions we asked, and again, if you have an interest, we'll find a way to distribute the report once it's ready. We're related to climate change impacts on transportation. So as you can see, let's focus on the coastal ones that are, again, the darker blue shade. 71% say moderate or significant, that they're experiencing moderate or significant climate change related impacts on their transportation infrastructure, right? So it's very important that we keep working to address those. Again, from the way I see it, both on the upstream side by minimizing our actions, contributions to climate change, but also on ensuring that our transportation infrastructure can be resilient to these extreme climate change events that keep happening more and more frequently. We also asked a question about the types of infrastructure, and I apologize that I know the font is pretty small. We had a lot of different options. So I'll mention just a few examples. Unpaved roads, stormwater drainage systems, ports and coastal transportation infrastructure. So obviously that was a big part of that. And here in this graph, we merged all the answers together, but I think we have them also separately by coastal and inland municipalities. So you see how unpaved roads and gravel roads, they're strongly affected versus paved roads or other types of infrastructures like bridges and airports. And lastly, we asked them, we were trying to understand what are some of the barriers of them, addressing these issues. And it came to be, as you can see from the answers, most of it is a matter of resources, right? A lot of municipalities in our state are very small. Some of them have like maybe one person working on, transportation-related aspects, and maybe they have other responsibilities on top of the transportation system in their municipality. So it's really hard for them, to have the time to invest in, developing solutions for making the transportation infrastructure more resilient, applying for grants that will give them the resources, and so forth. So we had a great discussion about that also during the summit. And again, all this will be summarized in a report that will be coming out soon. And with that, I'll pass it over to Marta. Or maybe, no, sorry, Rob, for the introduction.
Thank you so much. That was really great. So I'm really abridging these introductions because both Eleni and Marta have pages of awards that they've won and so forth, but just so that you have some understanding as to their background and where they come from. Marta is assistant professor of economics and public policy at the University of Massachusetts Amherst. So she focuses on the following: the risks and the socioeconomic impacts of climate change, renewable energy economics and policy analysis, and 3, the economics of green infrastructure, nature-based solutions, and ecosystem-based disaster risk reduction. She has been a fellow of NASA. She did her postdoctoral work at the Yale University's Climate and Energy Institute. And this is a really cool background, I think. She has a BS in Earth and Atmospheric Sciences, which she earned from the École Normale Supérieure in Paris. She has a Master of Environmental Economics from the École Polytechnique, as well as a Master of International Affairs and a PhD in Sustainable Development from Columbia University. Marta has also been a contributing author to the UN's IPCC. Marta?
So after this introduction, I want to tell you something about me from a personal standpoint. So you've seen I did a lot of school. And the reason is that I started doing atmospheric sciences in Paris. And you may wonder, given my accent, why Paris? Because you're Italian, right, Marta? So yes, I'm Italian. But Europe has international European fellowships. And so I got a fellowship to go to France. And I studied climate change. And I got depressed. And then I tried to understand what was the reason why we couldn't fix climate change. It was clear, where I was taking class after class and I was getting super sad. And so I thought, okay, the problem is economics. And so I decided to come to the US and study economics of climate change. And the entry point was the School of International Affairs, because what I wanted to do was to really work on supporting international treaties on climate change. So that's the story. That's why you've seen so many degrees. It was essentially me trying to find my path that led me to become a professor of economics and public policy. And for me, it was very important to also do public policy, because I want to make sure that what I do has immediate application and that I can continue having a conversation with policymakers. And not only policymakers at the national or international level, but also at the local level. And so you will see in our projects, we work with different levels of governance. And it's very important to start also at the local level when we think about climate change. So that's a little bit of the story about me. And nature-based solutions emerged as an area that I was very interested in, because, mini anecdote, because maybe you're tired after our presentations, mini anecdote, when I was working at NASA, there was a very good cafe. Actually, you probably know the building, because I never watched the TV series Seinfeld, but maybe you have. And you remember Tom's Restaurant, maybe in Seinfeld? Tom's Restaurant is the NASA building in New York City, and it's associated with Columbia University. I learned about Seinfeld because every time I was going to work, people would ask me to take pictures of the building, and I didn't know why. And eventually somebody told me that it was because of the TV series. Bottom line, there is a great cafe there, and I kept going to get hot chocolate after work because I was really depressed about climate change. And so I started thinking about, okay, solutions as well. And nature-based solutions has emerged as something really interesting that we can work on at the local level, at the national level, at the international level. So now we can jump in a little bit on the type of projects that we do. I say we because I work with a lot of students and collaborators. We have developed interdisciplinary projects, and I want to underscore the word interdisciplinary. It's indispensable to work across disciplines in this field, with the international and local partners. I have worked with the International Red Cross and Red Crescent, the Wetland International, maybe you have heard of it. So Wetland International works a lot on habitat restoration and conservation of wetland and salt marshes. And then I work with the United Nations Environment Program, the European Union, and then you see here also the Massachusetts Municipal Association and the ICMA, which is the International City Council Management Association. These are some partners in our projects, but our team has also provided assistance to different institutions and organizations. We provided assistance to the White House, that is very interested in developing a roadmap for nature-based solutions, and they have worked extensively on this. The World Bank, specifically with the group that works on nature-based solutions and implementation and financing in developing countries. And then more recently with the city of Boston, and this is an interesting project that I will mention why this is so relevant later when I show you some graphics, but I will give you a sneak peek, like a trailer of the movie, which is that one of the barriers that we're encountering, that we have already seen also in the slide that Eleni was showing, is that essentially we need expertise. One of the limitations that we have is that we need more expertise at the local level, at the national level, to deal with the complex issues related to climate change. And so the city of Boston has recently won a very large grant called the Climate Ready Workforce Grant. And this grant is meant to create a new workforce, so to train workers and to place them in strategic jobs that will help enhance resilience in Massachusetts. And we were asked to be on the advisory board to provide expertise related to our research on resilience. So this is very exciting in terms of solutions. So this project was mentioned before by Eleni. This is the big sister of the survey on transportation. And this was a survey meant to really create a baseline, a data set that would show where do we stand in terms of resilience in Massachusetts. The project was funded by the School of Earth and Sustainability, And it was developed in collaboration with multiple campuses in the UMass system. And I want to emphasize this, we were very proud of this, because it was not only interdisciplinary, it was also collaboration across campuses, so lots of coordination, but very important to bring together human capital and work together in finding strategies and solutions together. I also want to emphasize that partners in this project included numerous regional planning agencies and municipalities. But among planning agencies, I would like to thank Cape Cod Commission and the Martha's Vineyard Commission. The MMA was our fairy godmother in the survey dissemination, and they are always our partner in this type of surveys. This project, as I said, was meant to provide a comprehensive outlook and data baseline in relation to climate resilience in Massachusetts. In our analysis, there is a strong emphasis on the blue economy, and I will define it now. And it was important for us to have the perspective of municipalities and local communities. So when we think about the blue economy, what are we thinking about? We're thinking about communities, and we look at those communities from every possible facet, including the socioeconomic support system of the communities, and so a maritime or oceanic economic sector that supports the local communities. And we also want to keep in mind, in thinking about the community, so we think about the socioeconomic support system, but we also think about the physical and biological support system of these communities. So biodiversity, ecosystem services for coastal and ocean health of these communities. And that's our vision for blue economy when we think about resilience. So what I'm going to do now is to show you a few slides related to what we found through the survey. I don't know if the font in the graphics is going to be big enough, but I will just highlight some key points without going into too much detail, just the most important key factors. So we investigated environmental impacts, and in this graphic, you may recognize the color code that we used also in the previous graphics. In this graph, each line corresponds to a type of impact, and the colors correspond to the strength of the reported impact. So when you see dark blue, this means that there was a strong effect on, in this case, 42% of municipalities. So the length of the bit here tells you the percentage of municipalities that said, yes, it's a problem. And the color tells you the intensity. Dark blue, very strong, and then there is a decrease in intensity of the problem, and then yellow means it's not a problem now, but we foresee that it's going to be an issue in the future. So what I just want to mention here, and I described this figure because we're going to see the same structure in the next graphics. One of the things that emerged as a very common issue and brought up by several municipalities was wastewater management concerns, so sewage overflows, stormwater outflows, and this is something that essentially we are mapping in order to think about what could be strategies to address this type of issues. But there are many other areas of concern that were brought up in water habitat degradation, introduction of invasive species, harmful algal blooms, and high bacteria events. Something else that was also frequently reported is tree loss from high wind events, and also increasing risk of vector-borne diseases. We tested the results also through conversations in focus groups, and we have collected additional qualitative data. Other impacts, economic impacts. I'm actually going to go on this side. Infrastructure impacts first. You may probably guess already some of these impacts, and maybe you've already observed them yourself. Loss of beaches and properties due to shoreline retreat, damage to dams and or seawalls, damage to private property, but very specific to coastal areas, damage to ports and coastal transport infrastructure, and damage to stormwater drainage systems. So what you see in these graphics is the emergence of observed impacts and increasing concern in terms of intensity. So the question is, how do we finance fixing these problems? How do we address these issues? I'm going to go to one last slide related to the impacts, and then we're going to talk a little bit about solutions. This is economic impacts. For economic impacts, it's really an increase in costs on a variety of fronts. So additional costs associated with disaster response. Every municipality we spoke with told us the Department of Public Works has increasing costs every year, and we don't have the funds to cover everything, so we postpone a lot of work. Decrease in housing availability, difficulty obtaining home and building insurance, and you see that we start navigating through the real estate market problems. And we can find this type of real estate and insurability issues also in increasing housing insecurity, decreasing property values due to climate change risk. So this is happening not only at the coastal level but also at the inland level. So solutions, there are some messages that I wanted to share. First of all, I think we should just be impressed because municipalities are already working really hard and they are working on every possible front. I don't even know how they manage to do everything they do because applying for grants is hard work and very often they have to apply for grants to fix problems. So these are engineering strategies, and blue in this graph means that they've already deployed these strategies, and pink means they are interested in deploying the strategies and either they are saving for those strategies or they are preparing to apply for grants or they're trying to think about how to apply for grants. So as you can see, there is no inaction here. There is interest and awareness about everything that they can do to address issues. Up here, 65% of municipalities adopted tidal barriers, levees, wet flood proofing, improvement or expansion of wastewater systems, improvement or expansion of stormwater drainage systems, dry flood proofing. Essentially, you see there is a variety of interventions. And then now we go to one of my favorite topics, which is nature-based solutions. This picture is impressive because you see the percentage, 81% of municipalities has already adopted land conservation to address environmental issues. And why land conservation? Because we know that protecting ecosystems has a lot of co-benefits. One of the benefits is disaster risk reduction, another is climate adaptation, reduction in flood risk, for example, and then there are all the other co-benefits, including increase in specific ecosystem services, provisioning services, improvement in air quality, water quality, and then there are also recreational services. You see also nature-based solutions to mitigate and prevent erosion, nature-based solutions to prevent flooding, nature-based solutions to improve stormwater management, nature-based cooling strategies to reduce heat island effect. What I find fascinating is that, and I wanted to share, I don't have the graphic here, we collected similar data with partners in Scotland, Germany, Costa Rica. Massachusetts is super advanced in the implementation and deployment of these strategies. So I felt really hyped up when I was comparing graphics. But there is a sincere need to do even more. And the problem is that there are always some barriers. So just to reiterate something that was also discussed by Eleni, there are some resource barriers, and we compare the resource barriers. Dark blue is towns and light blue is cities. And you see that in both towns and cities, lack of municipal staffing capacity is more or less the same percentage, meaning the same 91%, 92% of towns and 85% of cities indicated that staffing capacity is a barrier for them. Followed by no centralized way to identify funding sources and lack of grant writing capacity. But of course, lack of grant writing capacity is a more dominant problem in small towns than in cities because staffing infrastructure is different in the two types of municipalities. We also looked at other types of barriers, coordination and governance barriers, And I want to emphasize one particular aspect that we think might be an area of improvement in the future, which is that many indicated need for regional cooperation to streamline solutions and accelerate them, and possibly reducing cost for groups of municipalities working together, and then need for more unified and coordinated efforts even within municipalities, essentially departments talking to each other and developing climate resilience plans. If you're curious about the top categories, insufficient resources to mobilize broad community support, this is especially true in towns, and difficulties changing regulations and bylaws, and difficulty identifying and prioritizing specific action steps. I would like to conclude with, I think we are running out of time, with the data and information barriers. Climate change is hard. It's really complicated. I don't know what you think, but it's like so many things to think about. It's really complex. And so one of the issues that was brought up is this lack of technical expertise. Municipalities tell us, we don't know how to start. This is too much. We have a select board, we have only 2 people volunteering, we don't even know how to get started on this. And so essentially, lack of technical expertise is being reported by 68% of towns as a major barrier. Insufficient public education of local residents around climate change, and insufficient metrics and tools to monitor progress. But if you look at the following, they are all about lack of technical expertise on natural resource management implementation, lack of technical expertise on climate change hazards, lack of technical expertise in engineering and on the ground projects. So you see that when you think about now the grant that the City of Boston has been applying to and successfully received about workforce development, that's really powerful because we really need to create this expertise at the local level. So these are some insights about the work that we did on resilience, but I give you like appetizer, because I know we have to close, but as an appetizer, we did work on nature-based solutions, and if you have to take away anything from this, one of the big problems in nature-based solutions for the adoption of nature-based solutions was that there was no evidence that they were cost-effective. But we did a survey, we reviewed more than 20,000 articles, and we found that 71% of studies indicated that NBS, so nature-based solutions, have consistently proven to be cost-effective approach to mitigate hazards. I have to tell you, this article went sort of viral because it became really helpful to have this information. So we got contacted by many international organizations, NGOs that wanted to have additional data or background data from this study to better understand and to support policies. So I think that this was really something I'm very proud of. We even got contacted by the government of Australia, several governments in Europe, so really this was amazing, and the White House. So this was really, really cool. Thank you. And hopefully this will have positive impacts. And the conversation with the White House is not over because I spoke with them again this morning. So this is very cool because we can include our research in their current program. There is electoral uncertainty, but there is still a lot of interest at the local level, so we are hopeful. And then something that is related to cost, among the ecosystem-based intervention most frequently found effective, coastal ecosystems are reported as cost-effective by 73% of the global studies. This is to say that protection of coastal ecosystems has strong economic benefits for local communities. And the studies that compared engineering solutions and nature-based solutions found that NBS are no less effective than engineering-based solutions. So that was also extremely surprising, deserves additional analysis, but this was the result of a global survey. So I'm going to conclude here by just mentioning that we also did research on green growth, especially recovery strategies after COVID. If you're curious, you can just Google me and send me a message, and I would be happy to share all these materials with you. Yes?
So a nature-based solution would be something like working on marshes and restoration.
Yeah.
Engineering would be like seawalls or...
Yes. Sam, thank you for this question. So nature-based solutions can be protection of existing ecosystem, or so protection of an existing ecosystem, or restoration of a degraded ecosystem, or completely regenerating an ecosystem that has been destroyed. Obviously, protection of an existing ecosystem is the cheapest solution. You don't have to spend a lot of money in just preserving. But nature-based solutions is like an action related to the conservation or restoration of an ecosystem. And engineering solutions would be engineering interventions, basically, more traditional. I have to say, hybrids are also emerging as very solid strategies, and it depends on the problem and it depends on the location. And one of the challenges in the development of these solutions is that it's really not pret-à-porter. Sorry for the very fashion metaphor. It's not pret-à-porter, it's haute couture, meaning you really have to create something specific for the location that you're looking at because of its specific ecosystem and community needs. Yes?
This is all extremely exciting, and I'm just curious, how is the new school doing in terms of attracting undergraduates, graduate students, and is the general, like, are your courses all oversubscribed because students are so interested in this too? Yes, or they should be.
So the campus has now, I think Darcy's at over 400 courses now are offered that have some element of something that was talked about today. In fact, the campus just launched its new strategic plan for the next 10 years, and it is fully founded in the campus serving the needs of the Commonwealth around sustainability. So we see this, that's exciting to us because I think we're really well positioned, and in fact, the administration is looking really to me and Darcy right now to help think about, okay, what do we have to build to support that? You know, it's surprising to me that some of our majors, the students are not beating the doors down. And in some cases, it's some of the more traditional, like geology, for example. As a discipline nationwide, the major numbers are going off a cliff. It's interesting. Environmental science, through the roof. And what I've been a little frustrated with is, like, I think some of the programs still haven't fully caught up with, like, what you saw today with, you know, physical scientists working with engineers, working with social scientists. And an environmental science degree typically is still, you know, it's a lot of toxicology and a lot of foundational stuff, and the students that we talk to daily want something broader. They want to know a little bit about how policy works. They want the communication skills to be able to work with governments or with policymakers or with a local stakeholder. And so that's what we're trying to build. So we're hopeful that we're a little bit ahead of the curve. There's a new environmental science major at UMass Amherst it was founded by the Stockbridge School of Ag, what was then the Department of Geosciences in Environmental Conservation, and it went from 0 to almost 400 students in about 3 years. So obviously, you know, I think this is the future. And like I was saying at the onset, the campus has world-famous disciplinary strength in the pieces. And I think, you know, we see just an amazing opportunity to find ways to bring them together.
Yeah, and if I may just add something, I think that young people are very smart. They are faster than the university because they don't even see interdisciplinarity. They think that environmental issues are just part of life, in every facet of life. And so in environmental policy classes, at least the ones I was teaching, they were students from every department on campus. And this environmental policy and economic analysis. So students just enrolled because they wanted food science, engineering, business school, economics, of course, public policy, but also conservation. We had a student who was working on corporate accounting and absolutely wanted to study environmental policy because they thought that it was going to be added value for them going into a PhD in corporate accounting. So I think it's happening.
Darcy works with a lot of interns, and I would say, you know, if you were ever thinking about wanting to have short-term impact, we're always looking for funds to support interns. They're typically unpaid, like being able to, well, no, I mean our interns, but our interns are paid. But the problem is that, we get way more applications than we're able to support right now. And that's an area, so it's clear there is so much interest. We're just trying to provide the resources for those students to get some more experience.
Can I add a quick thing?
Go ahead.
Please.
So I wanted to say that in civil engineering, so far we're offering only a bachelor's in civil engineering, even though the department is called Civil and Environmental Engineering, and they do take environmental engineering courses. But we're working now on establishing a BS in environmental engineering, so that will be an option for students, I believe, starting next year. And then the other thing I wanted to say is that what this center has facilitated is, like, I teach classes in transportation sustainability. I get students that are outside of engineering, right? And that, the crossing of, backgrounds, and it just makes the class so different. And even I learn a lot of things from, people that have a different background than me. So I think facilitating that cross-pollination across campus has been great for our students' education.
So I know Kim is getting anxious, but just one final thing. I'm teaching a course next semester with someone from the Department of English that is about climate change, coloniality, and decarbonizing the world. And so this is a climate scientist meets the humanities and fine arts. And that is another area where our School of Earth and Sustainability is really sort of on the cutting edge, where we're really integrating the people who know how to tell a good story, because that is so important to affecting people and ultimately impacting change. So there's an emergent environmental humanities program at UMass Amherst that we're partnered with, and that to me is part of the solution.